Peace. This is part 5, dealing with the subject matter commentary on the all men's meeting called by the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan on November 17th, 2025. We have given previous videos addressing the same topic of commentary on the all men's meeting called for by the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan on November the 17th, 2025. We've talked about the broader context of 2025 and the things that are happening in the world and in the nation. We talked about the industry of religion that Minister Farrakhan operates in. We talked about the numbers not looking good and the why, possibly, of why the meeting was held. We talked about a test being given to the student laborers. And in this part, I just want to share some of my notes. As a good student, or attempting to be a good student, I brought a pen and paper, and I took notes. I have about 3 pages of notes. And so today, I want to be something like a teacher's assistant. I want to help the teacher, or maybe better said, help the assistant to the teacher. Now, there were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 speakers. And if I'm anywhere I'm incorrect, feel free to correct me. Now, there were 5 speakers at this all men's meeting. Brother Jeffrey Muhammad opened up the meeting, and I appreciated how he said how good it is for us to dwell together in unity. He welcomed all those from different walks of life that don't prescribe to Islam or being a Muslim. He welcomed the Hebrew Israelites, the Masons. He welcomed the Omegas who were in there on their Founders Day. He represented the Moors who had a number of fezzes sitting up close to the front. I think there was about 7 of them sitting up close to the front. He gave them a strong round of applause for the brothers from the Moorish Science Temple of America. And he welcomed all brothers in general from different walks of life that are not members of the Nation of Islam. So I appreciate him lifting up that book of Psalms and sharing how good it is, that verse, how good it is for us to dwell together in unity. This part, I'm just sharing some of my notes. So if you missed class, or if you didn't take notes in class, that you might be able to share my notes to help us pass the test when our test comes. Are you with me? Okay, I hope so. Brother Leonard Farrakhan talked. I appreciated the words that he shared. Brother Abdul Aziz, formerly known as Brother Anthony or Captain Anthony, talked. He's the Assistant Supreme Captain to the Nation of Islam. Brother Supreme or Student Supreme Captain Mustafa Farrakhan spoke. And Brother Ishmael Muhammad spoke. So I am incorrect. It wasn't 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It would be more speakers because the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan came and spoke after Brother Ishmael Muhammad spoke. So with those list of speakers, that was the program in general. It was about maybe a little over 2 hours long or so. But I'm going to share now some of the notes from Brother Ishmael Muhammad that I took. He did talk about how it takes great strength, or how the Honorable Elijah Muhammad said, it takes great strength to abide in wisdom. The topic, again, was making our community a safe and decent place to live. He lifted up the scripture, let us make man, which is a biblical scripture, and he talked about that. He talked about a new beginning and how in what's called the Old Testament, or dealing with the 5 books of Moses, is also known as the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, and how the books start with Genesis. And he talked a lot about light and the verse of let there be light. He talked about Genesis and the meaning of Genesis, and the word having the word gene in it, meaning birth, a beginning, a base. He also said it meant to begin in talking, begin with the light of God, to begin with the light of God lighting up your mind and lighting up your life to come out of darkness. He talked about this first book of the Bible being a part of Moses's 5 books, and how Moses came to a people, meaning those that are called Black, Negro, colored, African American, that Moses came to a people that had no Genesis, the children of Israel. He talked about time begins when you are free from the womb or free from darkness. That time begins then. So when you're in the womb, time has not yet started yet, when you're not in light, but when you are in darkness. So time, according to my notes and Brother Ishmael, is partly dependent upon motion. And when you are free from your mother, or when you're free from your oppressor. Motion requires the presence of light, knowledge being comparable to light. That we need the presence of light in our life, and how the Black man, African American, moving in the womb of America is not yet free. That the essentials to life is the knowledge of self, the knowledge of our enemy, and how light can be comparable to having the knowledge of self. He talked about resurrection. He talked about men standing up. Yes, he talked about men standing up in comparison to resurrection, meaning resurrected from a dead state or a state of darkness to a state of having light or the knowledge of self. He talked about us as men being in obedience to acting in the will of God, and how when we act in the will of God, it is no longer one acting, but it is us acting with God, meaning us. So the scripture addressing us in the book of Genesis, no longer saying I, but saying us, and how God used man to create. Anywhere I make any mistakes, I take those upon myself and responsibility for those mistakes, and not desirous to misrepresent anything that our good brother, our great brother, Brother Ishmael said. Only hoping to add value to what he said, only sharing my notes, so that if you did not take notes, that you could read my notes and gain some value and understanding. Continuing. He talked about being fruitful and multiplying. He talked about power and dominion. He talked about power being in the use of your mind. He talked about the scripture of replenishing the earth. He talked about the wisdom of the sun and the moon, and how they represent symbolic knowledge compared to metaphorically in different ways, the sun and the moon. He talked about us being soldiers by nature. He talked about how the scripture of the Holy Quran talks about setting your face for religion being upright to the nature of yourself, or the nature in which you were created. He talked about the scripture turning yourself and being upright, and how we need a healing. I thought that was interesting choice of words, how we need healing, which is very true. He lifted up the quote of the most honorable Elijah Muhammad, saying our unity will solve 95% of our problems. And he also said to do for self or suffer the consequences, those being quotes from most honorable Elijah Muhammad. He talked about that quote, that our unity being more powerful than a hydrogen or atomic bomb. He talked about the subject matter, making our community a decent place to live, and that requiring the necessity of programs, the requirement of programs to make our community a decent and safe place to live. He talked a little bit about Daniel's prophecy, the book of Daniel, and the last chapters of Revelations. So those are just some of my notes on what Brother Ishmael shared with us. You can feel free to dig into them and to look up some of those scriptures. You can put those scriptures into your, or those words into your favorite search engine, add the word Bible or scripture, and it'll give you some knowledge, wisdom, and understanding of where you may find that information. So those are some of my notes on what Brother Ishmael said. I'm going to share a few things from my notes on what the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan said. Again, addressing the topic of making our communities a decent and safe place to live. He talked the same words of Elijah Muhammad, saying how it rejoiced in his heart to hear his minister speak with so much wisdom. Elijah Muhammad saying that he rejoiced in his heart to hear his minister speak with so much wisdom. And it was saying, all of us who preach, what good are we if we do not reproduce ourselves? He mentioned Reverend Jesse Jackson, who is not well currently, and saying that he spoke to him recently. Reverend Al Sampson was present. That's Reverend Al Sampson. Reverend Father Flager was present. The minister lifted up the scripture that God is love. He said, if you don't love, you don't have God. He talked about the prophets of God being in a class of supreme human beings, and said Prophet Muhammad was a matchless. He brought us a matchless book for the whole of humanity. And he said Prophet Muhammad, he compared him to being on the top of the mountain. The minister talked about how Elijah Muhammad gave him his assignment the first time he looked at him and said, you remind me of David. Minister, the master teacher, he said that we are required to discover God in ourselves and to discover our gifts. He made a comparison of a dog scratching or a dog digging, trying to find himself, to trying to find gifts, digging in the dirt, digging, trying to find something, looking, working, digging, but making a comparison to us digging and finding our own gifts. He said, he asked us, who are you? And we have to answer that question for ourselves. He said, love, when you have it, you can reflect God better. Said we must get into the nature of our creation, knowing the will of God. He gave us information about how to take rulership of the heavens and the earth, because it is time. He said that each of us should search our hearts and rid our hearts of envy, and talked about envy and the negative characteristic and how envy is not good and how we should rid our hearts of envy, that we shouldn't be angry with our brother who has a gift. How God so loves us that he shares himself with us, and that God is in everything and everyone. And each of us display different gifts, and we should find our own. He talked about a conversation that he had with one of Elijah Muhammad's sons, Herbert Jabbar, or Jabber, he said. He talked about Elijah Muhammad and the jet that the Nation of Islam bought Elijah Muhammad, and the grandson who was a pilot, who was a grandson of Elijah Muhammad and used to fly Elijah Muhammad around on this jet. This was all in context of a conversation that the minister had with Herbert Muhammad. I won't go too deeply into that. He talked about, the minister, or the master teacher talked about the attributes of God and these characteristics that we possess to some degree, and encouraged us again to find our own gifts, talents, and skills, and how we can use them to reflect God. He said, behold, I make all things new. Lifted up that scripture. He lifted up that scripture. Behold, I make things new. The minister urged us to learn humility. To learn humility, he said, will make us greater, or that God will make us greater when we practice humility. Again, encouraging us to make our communities a safe and decent place to live, to demonstrate that greatness of God in us. He talked about how the Holy Quran says that Jesus is the Messiah, how the command of God came through Elijah Muhammad, who commanded us to take control of where we live and our communities. And when we allow ourselves to be ourselves, to always be in the hand of God. He talked about Elijah Muhammad and how he flipped the switch because there was so much white talk. He gave a lot of black talk in the context of Jesus. He talked about Jesus and how Jesus lifted up words saying, when were you hungry or thirsty, and I gave you not food? He lifted up how he said, so you have done to the least of these, you have also done to me. He lifted up this scripture encouraging us to be of service, not just to the big shots, but to the least of these. He said that everyone is a big shot, of course, because we have God in us, and encouraged us to have love and feeling for our suffering people, the least of these, my brethren. Encouraged us to love and not envy. He encouraged the Muslims and all of us to love your brother, love for your brother, which you love for yourself. He said that again. He encouraged all of us to love for your brother, which you loved for yourself. He lifted up the word or the scripture saying, how can you have a teacher except that he be sent? He shared that scripture. How can you have a teacher except that he be sent? He encouraged us at the end of what he had to say to keep meeting and to use your talents to help others. To keep meeting and to use your talents to help others. And the last thing I have in my notes, I thought was an interesting group of words. He said, you become the teachers and leaders by noble example. He said, you become the teachers, the leaders by noble example. And so those are just some of the notes that I took as a student in the classroom of God. And I wanted to share those notes with you. This video is a part 5 of this multi-series. I hope that you found some value in my notes. Any mistakes I made, charge it to my head and not my heart. And I'm open to any corrections of any mistakes that I made, only seeking to aid the teacher or be a teacher's assistant or to aid the assistant of the teacher. Wishing you peace.